Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar on race nutrition for triathlon. My name is Kelsey Tobin. I'm an accredited practicing sports dietitian with Nutrient Nation and a fellow triathlete. So today we will be speaking all things race nutrition. I would like you to take away today a plan to be able to utilize in all of your upcoming races this season. So what we will be covering today is going through different time points in which nutrition is fundamental for performance. So we'll be looking at your pre-race nutrition, your race morning, during your race, so whether that's required and what is required at this time point, and then also your post-race nutrition, so looking at that recovery nutrition. So to start with your pre-race nutrition, the time in which this encapsulates is pretty much about 72 hours prior to your race starting. And there are some really fundamental nutrition principles to implement to increase your performance, decrease gastrointestinal upset as well. So some things to take note of during this time is firstly, lowering your fiber intake. So fiber are foods that require a lot of our body's effort and our gastrointestinal system's effort to be able to digest this. And when we are exercising at a higher intensity, we want to make sure that that blood is being directed to our working muscles rather than being required in our stomach to be breaking down that fiber content. So if we can lower this is really ideal for our performance for our race. So foods that are high in fiber are things like vegetables, fruits, multigrain products. So instead, we want to opt for those lower fiber options. So things like crumpets, rice, bagels, white pasta versus your wholemeal or legume-based pastas, and potato with no skin. Or if you're having more vegetable-based options, cooking them as much as possible and taking the skin products off. The other nutrition principle to take into account is lowering your fat content. So like what I described with fiber, fat also requires a lot of our body's effort and blood directed to our stomach to make sure that fat is digested efficiently and properly in our stomach. So if we can lower our fat content, so this is both good and bad fats, in our diet, days prior to the event, you'll find that you're reducing your risk of gastrointestinal upset. So if we can limit those takeaway options prior to your race, which practically sometimes this can be difficult if you are away for your races, limiting adding sauces, butters, creams, cheeses in your foods, opt for more leaner protein. So rather than things like sausages, rissoles, salamis, opt for more leaner cuts of protein sources, like your chicken breast, a lean cut of steak, etc. Next is making sure nothing is new prior to your event. Now, we'll describe in a moment some different types of protocols that we need to do to make sure that we've got enough glycogen or energy in our systems, which needs to be practiced prior to you going to your race. So we need to make sure nothing is new at this time point. So that means your pre-race nutrition, this means all your nutrition products that you're using, that might be electrolytes, carbohydrate-based products, gels, etc. Making sure that also all your different types of storage units for your nutrition is not new, because you need to make sure that you're confident with utilizing it, making sure that you're not dropping certain things. And this, to be honest, can be applied to things like your race suit as well. We need to make sure that that's not a new thing because we don't know where it rubs. For example, new goggles, not a good idea because we need to know that they fit properly, for example. The other thing to take note days prior to your event is making sure that you are really well hydrated. So ways that we can help guide that is things like our urine color. This can also be things like your thirst, dry skin, concentration levels, getting headaches, things like that. So we need to make sure that we are nice and well hydrated. If you're noticing that you do have quite a high sweat rate, or you are in a hot environment, consider adding an electrolyte into your water to assist with that hydration. So in addition to those principles prior to you coming into your event, one of the most important things to go over with triathletes is carbohydrate loading. Now, Firstly, let's discuss what carbohydrate loading is, and then we'll consider whether you need it or not, and then we'll look at actually how to implement it. So what carbohydrate loading is when we are loading the muscles with glycogen, which is our energy. So this can take, 24 to 48 hours prior to your race. And we need to make sure that glycogen load, that carbohydrate load is super high. Now, this means that it can be really difficult to meet this guideline, which we'll talk about in a second what that is, when you're just eating, regular day-to-day fueling foods, your toast, your breads, your pastas. Sure, they're going to be embedded in your carbohydrate loading plan, but you'll notice that when we make this plan for you, that there will be some discretionary options in there because it becomes quite difficult to meet this high carbohydrate demand on more whole food based options. Now, to make sure that we are loading these carbs into our muscles, we need to make sure that we are tapering our exercise, because if you think about it, if we're going and then utilizing that energy with your training, with your racing, etc., you're lowering those glycogen levels. So we need to make sure that you're entering that race with the full muscle glycogen levels. Make sure that this carbohydrate loading is planned and practiced with all the different types of foods that you're familiar with, because of the high carbohydrate load, some people, if they're not used to it, can get some GI upset as well. Now, for those that are going to implement this, please don't fret when over this period of time you load your muscles with this glycogen. Naturally, because of the nature of carbohydrates, they do store water. So you will very likely gain a little bit of weight, but that's not a bad thing whatsoever. So to be specific, what this actually means for you in regards to the numbers. So a lot of our equations in sports dietetics are based off of grams per kilogram of body weight equation. And for carb loading, so 24 to 48 hours prior, you need to be consuming 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight per 24 hours. So I usually tell my athlete to come up with a 24-hour plan and then emulate that for 2 days in a row. Now, you'll also note here that it does say in a greater than 90-minute event. Now, this is also very important to note because for some of you, carbohydrate loading may not even be required. So this might be in a sprint distance triathlon or something like a shorter running race, for example. Yes, we need to increase our carbohydrate intake prior to these events, but usually the carbohydrate loading protocol is only really super useful in events that are greater than 90 minutes. Now, the other thing also to note that we will go over is this pre-event fueling. So this is part of your carbohydrate loading plan. However, it is kind of separate in a sense that there is some specific protocols with that, and that's the 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight in the 2 to 4 hours prior to your event. So if we were to calculate this for a 60-kilo female individual, this would make her goal carbohydrate rate for the 24 hours to be around 600 grams of carbs. Now, this plan specifically is 612 grams of carbohydrates, so pretty much bang on what this individual is needing. Now, if we look through a lot of these options, they're options at things that this individual may not usually consume. So things like they might be having, a usual breakfast for them might be Wheat Bix, milk and banana. They don't usually use the honey. So what we've done there is we've found a really high carbohydrate source and added that to our cereal option to increase that carb load, but not really feel that we are eating more volume of food. For this individual, we've also found more of a higher carbohydrate-based muesli bar and consuming juice now instead of a plain orange, for example. So looking at this 500 mils of orange juice, giving you 40 grams of carbohydrates. If you actually were to juice just one orange, if we were just to eat it in general, you'll find that that's going to be maybe a quarter of what that carbohydrate can provide. So the juice in this instance for this carbohydrate loading time period is the better option for this person. Other options, things like going for more of a white rice, this is then lowering the fiber content. We're looking at things like adding beverages to different times points in the day. Again, we're adding juice, a high carb beverage at meals. And then we're also opting for things like tinned fruit rather than in the syrup rather than the juice, for example. So just opting for different options there. So what we want you to do now is, after I read out these instructions, I would like you to pause the webinar here and actually come up with a carbohydrate protocol for yourself according to your own metrics. So firstly, I would like you to write out your usual intake the week before a race of like just one 24-hour period. It doesn't have to be for the whole week. It could just be for 1 or 2 days. And this will be in your booklet in a page that looks like this on the left here. Then secondly, we would like you to use your carbohydrate counter or calculator, which looks like this, which is in your booklet, to calculate how many carbohydrates you are currently consuming. Then, using this carbohydrate counter, we want to add or modify your current intake, what you're used to, and make sure that you're then meeting those carbohydrate requirements that we recommend. So the 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight. Okay. Now, also taking note, when we're adding all these carbohydrates, we need to make sure that we're not hiring the fiber or the fat content in our diet at this time point. So if you can think about that when you are making your choices, that would be great. So please pause here and please complete this activity. Okay, so what we're up to now is our race morning nutrition. So like what I mentioned before, it's still part of our pre-race nutrition. We haven't raced yet, but it has its own separate nutrition protocol. So we, again, need to embed in our brains that the more carbohydrates that you have on board, the better and the faster that you're going to go. To a point, of course, that too much carbohydrate can cause GI upset, but making sure that you are prioritizing those carbohydrates, because if you don't put enough in your system, you're not going to be able to fuel and perform as well as you could have. So what do you need to eat pre-race? The grams per kilogram of body weight equation is 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight in the 2 to 4 hours prior to your event. Now, this really comes down to setting a few different time points in your morning, and will be considered what time your race start is, but also what time you wake up as well. Okay, so if you have 3 to 4 hours prior to your event, we encourage that then you can be more at that 4 grams per kilogram of body weight in the lead up into your event. And this does also mean that you've got additional time points that you should be consuming some food. So this 3 to 4 hours prior is things a little bit more lower in GI carbohydrates, so they take slower to release into our blood levels. So things like a bowl of muesli with yogurt, some cereal, could be some toast, peanut butter, banana, honey, etc. Okay. Now, if you only have, an hour, 90 minutes prior to your race start, we then want that carbohydrate to be a little bit more refined, and potentially it'll even a little bit more smaller in nature, so it's not sitting on our guts too much. So this could be things like a bowl of low fiber cereal, such as rice bubbles, Cocoa Pops. It could be things like a yogurt pouch and banana, making sure that yogurt pouch is not high in protein. Could be things like rice cakes and honey. It could be things like crumpets and jam, pikelets even. And then if we've only got 30 minutes prior to our race start, we're again going even more refined. So lollies, carbohydrate-based drinks, or a gel. Now, it's definitely not recommending that you just roll out the door 30 minutes prior to your race and just consume one of those final options there. We recommend that, say, for example, you do have 3 hours before, that you're then hitting each of those different time points after that to ensure that you are refueling that carbohydrate load. So it's now that time where we would like you to create your own race morning nutrition plan. So firstly, write out what your usual morning nutrition routine is on a page that looks like this. You'll see that there will be pre-race and post-race. This is the pre-raced option. So I'd like you to write there what that pre-race option currently is, okay? Then secondly, you're using that carbohydrate calculator to calculate on average how many carbohydrates are usually consumed. So you're then getting a bit of an idea of how far off you are from that 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight. And then lastly is to make those modifications, ensuring that you're meeting that optimal carbohydrate amount. So this could be just adding a glass of juice to that toast that you usually have. This could be adding the honey to the peanut butter that you usually have on your toast. So it's very likely that those modifications may be small, but it is definitely very important that you do that. And that's going to be on the page that looks like this. You'll notice that there's the timeline up above here, and then we're writing our actual plan here on the left. So I'd like you to pause here to complete the activity. Okay, now we are getting to our race, and this is going to cover nutrition during our competition. So during nutrition competition, always is going to be dependent on the duration and the intensity of your event. So as you can see on the right here, this nice timeline, we have from 0 to 3 hours plus, okay? And you can see that the carbohydrate recommended for this is increases as the duration of your event goes for. So if you think for a standard sprint distance triathlon, we're looking at between this marker here. So we're really at that fine line between actually consuming carbohydrates on board to get the benefit versus just having something like a mouth rinse with a carbohydrate-based option in a drink bottle, for example, or from an aid station, rinsing it in your mouth and spitting it out. So this is going to be dependent on the individual and potentially how well you carb loaded as well. But then if we start to dive into things like Olympic distance, 70.3 Ironman, etc., is that we are then getting into a little bit more detail in terms of the grams per hour of carbohydrates that we do consume. And this can also be applied to when out training, which is probably more going to be you guys, where you're going to be training for longer hours, such as on the bike, where we can get more of those carbohydrates on board. Now, carbohydrates is only one element of this during competition. Next is then also hydration. So hydration during any event, we should be preventing 2% of your body loss during that period. So once you hit that loss of 2% of your body weight, you enter a dehydrated state. So to prevent that from happening, we need to consume about 75% of our hourly loss during that period of time to prevent this dehydration. And this can start by, if it's really hot, if you're a high sweater, or if you're doing any activity probably greater than 45 minutes is when you start to need to consider about this. And then lastly is your sodium. So sodium helps retain that fluid, and it's what the majority of the electrolyte that actually comes out in our sweat. So the research around sodium isn't that great at the moment. However, what we do know is that everybody has very different sweats concentration, so I can't be specifying a specific amount to you all. However, what's really important is that those that sweat a lot are out for long periods of time, or they're racing in very hot climates, it is definitely recommended that you do get a more individualized protocol with your sports dietitian. They can do sweat tests with you. Also to note, to never go over a 1-to-1 ratio of sodium to fluid. So what I mean by that is that if you're to consume 400 milligrams of sodium, that you are consuming that sodium with at least minimum 400 mils of water. That's really important to make sure that you're not getting any GI stress. Okay, so now we need to create a little bit of a plan of what our race nutrition is actually going to look like. So you would have noted that I'm mentioning our carbohydrates based off a grams per hour option. So I'd like you to think about, firstly, how long you'll be racing for, because that's going to dictate how much carbohydrates you're going to need on board. What food nutrition products will you be using, particularly what you've been practicing with as well? Where will you be restocking? Are you restocking in the aid stations? Are you going to have it already on your bike? Are you going to use, what are you going to use? Do you need an emergency nutrition kit? Some people have stuff in their transition just in case they've dropped something along the way. Say, for example, on the bike, they dropped one of the gels that they were going to consume at the 20-kilometer mark, but they've come into transition and they're just picking up that spare one that they have missed for their run. How are you going to carry your nutrition? How many water bottles holders do you have? Do you have to make sure that there's something in your tri-suit that can assist with this? And then lastly, which is also an important point, is what does the event supply? So if you're going to rely on course nutrition, you need to practice with it. So please make sure that you're doing that. Okay, so now is the time to pause your webinar here, and I'd like you to search in your workbook for the page that looks like this here, where you're going to jot out what hour of the event is. So as I said, we're based off of grams per kilogram of body weight equation, a per hour grams per hour equation for your carbohydrate, and that carbohydrate is based off that pink graph of the timeline. So if you are actually going to consume the carbs because you're out there for 90 minutes, we need to be consuming around that 30 grams per hour. But if you're out there for 3 hours, we're looking at more the 80, 90 grams plus, okay? Then we're going to specify what type of nutrition option we're going to be consuming. Is it going to be gels? Is it going to be carb-based drinks? Is it going to be salt tablets? Is it going to be chews? Is it going to be a Vegemite sandwich? Okay. Then we're going to specify in that hour how many carbs is in that nutrition option, how much sodium and how much fluid. Now, to find out particularly the sodium and the carb content, we can type this into Google, usually look at the back of the packets, or actually type it into apps such as Easy Diet Diary to give us that information. Our fluid amount should be based off how much we're losing. So I do recommend for those people that you are comfortable weighing yourself to get a bit of an idea of your sweat rate and making sure that you're replacing about 75% of that sweat loss per hour. Now, for those in longer events, this checkpoint restock, things like transition aid stations, can be a useful point to make note of. So please pause here and please complete that table. Okay, so finally, we're up to post-competition nutrition. So post-competition nutrition is super important because as triathletes, usually we get kickstart back into training pretty immediately after our races. If not, that's okay too. We can also use nutrition as a way to reduce DOMS and to stimulate that muscle growth, muscle synthesis and recovery. So ideally, we want to get some form of nutrients within the 30 to 60 minutes of activity being finished, as this is a time where our body is really open and ready and available to take that nutrition on board. What that nutrition should look like is making sure that you're repairing with protein and you're refueling with the carbohydrates that you've just used. So if you're wanting a bit of a grams amount, it's 0.25 grams per kilogram of body weight of the protein and 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight of the carbohydrates. So you can calculate that, use the carb counter. Your protein can be calculated based off backs of packets, Easy Diet Diary, etc. Making sure that you're combining these two options together to increase the rate of replenishment as well. So some good examples that actually hit those 2 points would be things like flavored milk, a good old chalky milk and a peanut butter sandwich. Could be some high protein yogurt such as YoPro, Chobani Fit with some fruit. It could be 2 eggs on some toast with juice. It could be some leftovers such as spaghetti bolognese. After you consume this recovery meal as soon as possible, then consuming very frequently after that with some form of protein to continue drip feeding that protein in to optimize your recovery. So if we were to put this all together, what I would like you to do using this template that you can see here on the screen, I would like you to implement this into all those documents that I've just told you to pause at. We're then bringing it together to create a specific timeline. So this is from that 24-hour countdown where we're looking at the carbohydrate loading principles to then looking at more the the morning of your event, and then specifically your race nutrition, and then your post-race nutrition. Now, as a function of having this timeline, you have one document that covers all nutrition principles that has been covered in this webinar. So if you found this nutrition webinar super useful and you're feeling that you're still wanting some ongoing support in different areas of your performance nutrition, Nutrient Nation now has a Fuel Up Hub membership that delivers high performance advice to all our athletes. The best way to do and get access to this is sign up to our email list to get all the updates. You can also follow us on Nutrient Nation on Instagram for some educational posts. This Fuel Up Hub can be super useful for things like videos of all our sports dietitians delivering some education, fact sheets that can be useful, things like your carb counters and things. If you're starting to utilize those, then you found them quite useful. We'll have some recipes posted and all different types of cool stuff that is updated on a monthly basis. So without further ado, that is it for today. I hope you found this race nutrition webinar super useful and happy racing.